Chapter 4. The horses kept pace for 2 hours and then began to tire. The road was climbing steadily in altitude, but winding as well. Sometimes there were breaks in the tree line around them. They'd now reached the deepest part of the forest here in the foothills. Turning a bend, they found their path blocked by 2 carts laden with rocks. A strange glow seemed to come from the rocks. Shy horses had been used to pull the heavy carts up here in the dead of night. 6 shy horses could be seen feeding on bales of hay and molasses treats on the snow at the side where they'd been tethered up. "Who goes there?" shouted Bruno. "Hey, whoever you are, you can come and move your carts, because they're blocking my way. I'm a busy farming family man and I must pass." There was no reply to Bruno's call. Bruno reached for his derringer and stepped out of the sled. He calmed down his own horses and gestured to Monika. "Get ready to set off as soon as I move one of their carts. I'm going to hitch up 2 of those shies and see if they will pull that sled away." "Anybody around?" shouted Bruno again. With no reply, he untethered the oldest shy horse, hitching it to the wagon which blocked his immediate path. Bruno put some rocks behind the cart wheels at the back and untethered the other shy horses. He gave the shy horses some mince from his pocket, where he always kept a treat for his own charges. The horses stamped their feet and lifted their tails to relieve themselves, but they were won over when Bruno began to talk to them gently, patting them gently on their necks. Bruno led the horses one at a time to the cart, where he hitched them up. He removed the rocks from behind the cart and tapped the horses to lead on. Slowly, the very heavy cart began to move away from its resting spot. After a few minutes, Bruno was able to steady the cart. He lifted the 2 rocks used as chocks off the cart and placed them behind it. The cart had been moved by just the right amount to allow Bruno's sled to pass. Bruno then retethered the old shies back up to their resting places to allow them to continue their feeding treats. He rushed to the sled and pulled on his reins to giddy up his pair of mountain ponies. Feeling braver than Bruno, Monika had been tidying up the sled load in her father's absence. The road position of the blockage allowed some relief from the biting blizzard. Monika lit some more torches to illuminate the area since she wanted to see her way. Weird that. Who would leave shy horses and quarried rocks unattended at this hour? Weird that. Who would leave horses and quarried rocks unattended at this hour? Why block the road? Just then Bruno heard a sharp click and some twanging noises behind them. Suddenly there was a heavy thud as a crossbow bolt embedded itself into a tree trunk just 10 metres to his side. This was swiftly followed by 2 more crossbow bolts aimed to their left as well. Bruno and Monika ducked but spurred the horses on. As soon as they felt out of crossbow range, they stopped their horses. The ponies were foaming with sweat, breathing very heavily at their exertion of escaping from the terror. Monika remained in the sled, which Bruno tethered to a pile of cut logs nearby. Bruno leapt out of the sled, fetching his rifle. The pile of logs looked freshly sawn. They could see a path going into the forest and heard the sound of feet running away on it. "I think I've seen some elves," shouted Bruno. Bruno had obviously spotted something behind them on the road from where they'd fled from the carts. "Look back over there, Monika. There's a group of 6 torches moving around the carts where we were blocked. I can't make out any faces, but I can tell you something about the people who are there. I don't think they're as big as us. They can only be one thing. I believe they are elves." So much folklore existed around tales about elves here in the Silver Federation. Most villagers claimed that the elves had their own kingdom. Certainly, there were many sightings of groups of elves, but no real evidence of a kingdom up here. Monika snapped out of her dreaming to find Bruno aiming with his hunting rifle at the flaming torches. "Do not shoot, father. Please do not kill an elf. You know that it will be the end for us if you kill one of their kind in anger. Please, do not shoot at them." Bruno took closer aim with his rifle and was about to fire at a point close to one of the moving flames. Monika ran to him and yelled, "No!" Monika grabbed at the rifle, knocking the barrel out of aim literally a fraction of a second before her father was about to pull the trigger. Bruno stamped the ground, dropping his gun with frustration. Monika ran to the loaded rifle and ejected the bullet in its cartridge from the barrel. She took the rifle back and tucked it under the blanket where it belonged. "You must know, father, that they would have killed us if they wanted to. In the fairy tale books I read, it says that the elves have to protect themselves from strangers and will kill to do so. By shooting bolts in our direction, they're warning us to stay away. They're deadly shots with a crossbow. They could have taken our lives at any stage, but they let us pass. Then let us pass." Bruno looked at Monica with a pained expression. Monica reached inside her father's satchel to get him his tobacco, pipe and matches. She filled the pipe for him and lit it. Bruno leaned heavily against the sled as the flaming torches sputtered around him. He dropped his head down, feeling exhausted. The burden of trying to support his family in such hard times was weighing heavily on him. Monica could see that he felt alienated, like she was deliberately trying to hide something from him. She made the decision to try and give him a partially correct version of events at the market. "Look, Father, I know that times are very hard for us at the moment. I must have been half asleep back then at the market. I was really just too scared to tell you that I think that people did shortchange me when I was managing the clothing end of the stock. I took my off the ball, and I do believe that I was taken advantage of. However, I didn't want to let you know at first, because then you might have chased after the people, and I thought they were too dangerous for you to take on, and I was scared, Father. I was really terrified of what might happen to you. Only last year a market trader was left seriously injured when he tackled two men who tried to wrench some valuable china from his grasp. The attack caused him to have a stroke which left him paralysed on one side of his face. I just don't want that for you. Tell me, Monica, who took the missing stock? Who helped themselves? I can't believe your story unless you give me specific details. It's like this, Monica. I love you very much, you know, just as I equally love all of my girls. I owe it to all our family to defend all of you. If I can't track down who's taking my stock and not paying for it, then they'll be back, you know. How does it help our family if you refuse to tell me who took our stock? What will we do now? Am I to tell your mother that the only reason I can't pay for new stock for our breeding programme with the cows and pigs and goats is because someone or some group of people are just helping themselves to the fruits of our labours? I'm so angry with you, Monica. I can't begin to tell you how angry I am that you just wouldn't let me tell me, that you just wouldn't tell me when it happened and let me take the decision as head of the family on how I want to track the thieves down. What about your life, Father? Am I not able to make a judgment about the risk to your life? Said Monica, fighting back her tears. I'm sorry, Monica. I'm so sorry for making you cry. I just do not feel right about anything at the moment. Life weighs heavily on my shoulders. I hate myself for admitting any weaknesses to you, but you're my eldest daughter, so I must trust you the most to bear some of my burdens. I have to find out who's taken our stock. If you won't tell me, then I will tell the market authorities and let them investigate it. I'll tell you this, Father. If you push this too hard, you'll regret it. If you let our friends at the market try to help us, then maybe there is a solution. The only thing they can do now is be more vigilant and report any suspicious activity. I think we're safe until the spring thaw. We can go again to market next month and no one will bother us. We have nearly 2 months of worry-free time ahead. So now you tell me, Monica, the truth has come out at last. We're being blackmailed by someone who's got through to you. You're too afraid to admit it to me or your mother. Plus you think you can handle all of this on your own. Bruno recharged his pipe as Monica heated up some snow on a spirit burner. Monica used the boiling water to make some acorn coffee. Once refreshed from the bitter drink, Monica and her father were ready to carry on. Father and daughter got back into their sled. Just as they pulled away from the woodcutter's pile, they heard rustling in the forest. It sounded like more than one disturbance. Bruno reached again for his rifle, but Monica gripped his arm as a clear voice shouted out, "You're kind, dear travellers. You'll be safe now in the woods," they heard the voice say. "I think it's the elves, Father. I think it's the elves. They know we won't kill them now. They're going to leave us alone from now on," said Monica with tears running down her face. "Goodbye, elves. We didn't mean you any harm. We are the Veltimes. We live in the farm up in the mountain. We need some help. Save our farm. We need some help badly," Monica shouted at the elves. Bruno G'd up the horses, shaking his head in a rage. "You do not tell him anything, Monica. Now you've given away our family's plight to strangers who shot at us with crossbow bolts. These mountain elves do not know what our troubles are. They will now decide to take advantage of our weakness." "I don't want the help, Monica. I can sort out our troubles myself," shouted her angry father. Monica did not speak to her father again. Her mind raced at the events of the last few days. Monica and her sister Sophia were all too aware that something was changing with their lives on the farm. Both sisters had seen their father in his little office with his head in his hands. The letters arriving at the family farm seemed to be quickly directed away from his wife Wilhelmina, which was causing great tension between the couple. Seeing the mountain elves, plus having the experience of being part of the magic conjured up by the strange old woman in the Wild Wall public house, had made a big impression on Monica. Monica still felt in shock about the encounter with the nasty old man in the market. He had targeted her to get at her father. Whatever Bruno's financial position, it was none of that man's business to threaten and intimidate his family. The forest road snaked higher and higher up the mountain. The sled crossed over a series of bridges where the road passed back and forth on the mountain river. For the first time in her life, Monica noticed that the bridge had statues of elves on it. She'd never previously paid attention to exactly what the statues were. There were stone carvings of elves, plus water creatures depicted on the bridge parapet and arches. Beneath the archways it was a frozen world of ice. Water still tumbled down the mountain, but there was a thick layer of ice on top of it. The ice did not stop the flow of mountain water beneath its uneven, glassy surface. Huge stalactite-like ice fingers clung to the bridge in places. Sheets of ice coated places on the road like some devilish ice rink. Monica looked down into the snow-filled chasm of the valley. At some 300 metres away, she could see a small cluster of torchlights by the mountain stream. Close to them she could make out some flickering, eerie green light. She felt as if this was a trick of the night, but just then she looked up and a real water fairy in glittering silver garb with iridescent wings flew above her on the bridge. Monica could see the fairy's face. She had black hair, which was braided. She had green eyes and lots of freckles. The fairy girl saw Monica and smiled back at her, waving her glittering stick. From the stick, a host of silver glitter came down and showered the Veltheim family sled. Continuing to watch the fairy, Monica saw her diving down some 50 metres in the air, twisting acrobatically. Looking down, Monica saw the fairy plunge into the torrent of ice-encrusted water. There was a small light under the water where the fairy had gone in. Monica was sure that she could see other eerie green lights deeper underwater. The torchlights by the bank of the stream, which had first aroused her curiosity, still puzzled her. Was it a group of mountain elves? If so, what were they doing around the water fairies? No time existed to ponder these events any more. Bitter howling mountain winds descended to ground level. At times, snow clouds seemed to be at ground level, such was the mass whirling around them. Trees swayed to near breaking point in the strong winds. In small clearings, the Veltheim family sled took the full brunt of the blizzard. Both father and daughter pulled their hoods up even tighter on their faces to protect themselves. By the time they reached the Edelweiss Inn, they were both frozen to the core and exhausted with the battle against the elements. Small gaps in the snow clouds allowed starlight to filter through, but the clouds were scudding so quickly past that it looked as if the very mountain was racing by. Arriving outside the inn, the Veltheims were greeted by Saul, the groom, who was outside dressed in fur boots and hat and jacket. Saul was busy shoveling snow. The inn had to be ready to receive travellers at all times to make ends meet. Later on, Saul would be expected to continue working around the stable block to feed horses, dogs, and any other livestock brought by travellers to stay overnight. Bruno had decided to approach the inn after all. It was well before dawn, but since travellers often set off in the early hours, it was not unusual to find the groom at work at this time. "How about a nice coffee and some rolls with cold cooked meat and pickles and gherkins for 2 weary farmers?" he shouted in a strained voice. Monica was silent, still smarting from her telling off for communicating with the mountain elves. Saul could sense that something was seriously wrong, so he put a down-to-earth spin on his reply to the tired Veltheims. "It's you two. My, I thought you'd be long gone and past the Edelweiss by now. It's you two. My, I thought you'd be long gone and past the Edelweiss by now. Have you been celebrating a good day's market trading?" Instantly, Saul could see the drawn expressions on the travellers' faces and changed his tack. "I'll see what I can do for you now. There's a stove on the go in the stable block already, with a pot of coffee nearly on the boil. I'll run inside to the kitchens to raid last night's fare and get you some cooked meats. You do not mind some cold mixed stew and dumplings, do you? I could warm it up on the stove outside if you like, only we think it's better to eat it cold. Tell you what, Saul, bring the whole pot of stew and dumplings and we'll make a meal of it with hot bread and hot cooked pastries. The stew might be cold, but we'll heat up the dumplings for good measure. I'll pay you the going rate, lad, plus here's a tip for your troubles," shouted Bruno as he handed over enough cash to cover a meal for 2 and drinks, plus extra for Saul's pocket. Soon the busy groom had laid out a rough table in the stable block. He put a tablecloth on it. The hour had marched on, so even the cockerel who held sway. The hour had marched on, so even the cockerel who held sway in the sheltered stable yard was stirred by the activity. He jumped up on the 2-metre-high wall with his short feathers giving him the necessary flight, and began crowing loudly to all and sundry. "Come and join us, Saul. We're just about ready for that coffee you promised," boomed Bruno. Saul managed to spend 10 minutes with them as they downed hearty quantities of the stew and dumplings, followed by hot, spicy currant pastries and other leftovers from the night before, which had been left covered in the kitchen. "One thing we must ask, Saul. Have you ever seen the little people in the forest? Is it common for a group of elves to be about cutting wood and carting the glowing stones about in the dead of night in these parts?" "Well, they do say that there is a lost tribe of Ingolber elves who used to hold sway over all things here. The elves are said to live underground in a complex cave city, with all their needs met by bartering and trading. It's certainly true that mountain folk trade with elves at places. Surely the elves have called on your farm in the past. They've 1 or 2 friends along the valley who act as intermediaries to the trade. I've always had my own ideas about this fairy tale legend. We do our best to keep the legend going around here because it brings visitors to the region, and my employer needs trade and custom to survive. Apparently we've had elves calling in at our inn at times, but only to trade and ask for any scrap metal and spare timber. I think I've seen them at work in the forest, but my job is to keep folk coming to the Edelweiss. I'm not about to get too involved with what goes on around me, unless my employer decides to pay me to get involved. Folk do believe that mountain streams have water fairies which live in them. We have a lot of pictures of elves and fairies in the inn, and we do ask our resident musicians to really play it up with reference to making up local folk songs, all to an elf and fairy theme. We're very keen on promoting tourism up here because without customers we all lose our employment. A few years ago I was called up to do military training, and we went on an exercise close to a river crossing just over the valley. After missing sleep for over 48 hours, I convinced myself that I saw a fun fair in the distance and could hear the Wurlitzer. I could even smell the candy floss and hot dogs. I was just waiting for the ice cream treat and thought I could see a pretty girl with wings who looked just like Monica flying over the water, but sadly I was just hallucinating due to sleep deprivation. Once I'd finally got the stand to, I was able to get some brandy and ginger snap biscuits to fortify me, and this led me to understand that my fun fair was probably just a figment of my overactive mind. The mind does play tricks with you. I can make cards disappear before your eyes. Here, pass me that deck. With that, Saul was able to take out a card and wave it at Bruno. He moved it around, and then in a deft move the card was gone from his hands. In just such a space of time the card reappeared. Saul continued with his knowledge about the Ingolber elves. The Ingolber Empire legend is just that in my eyes. It is a legend. The mountain elves we see are probably an extended family who live a reclusive life up here dealing in scrap metal. Any tools they can trade for and precious metals that they barter, plus timber. They're thought to do some quarrying. They do barter certain gemstones and semi-precious rocks to dealers. The Ingolbers is the term we use to describe the lost empire of elves, but folk round here do not believe that any of the elves you see about here in the mountains are in any way linked to this mythical empire. A lot of money is, however, made by townsfolk off the back of the Ingolber legend, you know. There was a shop come trading post called Ingolber Trading Post some miles up the road once. You might have seen a ruined hut just 5 miles up the road from here. This was the location of the long since gone trading post. In fact, a lot of travellers use it to ride out storms or for a rest, and to brew up if they run out of cash for staying with us at the Edelweiss Inn. It's not a secure place, and you're subject to the local band of elves checking anything left behind for scrap metal and asking folks to trade with them. All manner of strange travelling folk might drop in during the night, if you were ever brave enough to stay there. I expect you might have heard of what happened to the Ingolber craft shop at some time, so please stop me if I'm going over familiar ground. With no reply from Monica and Bruno, Saul continued. Well, one day another local traveller was left behind in the trading post. One day another local traveller and fellow trader told us that the Ingolber trading post business had gone. The signs were all gone, and the man had gone. All that was left behind in the trading post was a little golden bird in a cage. The little golden bird in its cage belonged, it was claimed, to someone who'd fallen on hard times and tried to sell the item for a tidy profit, and that was his undoing. The Inglebers and water fairies had apparently taken pity on the traveller who was running the Ingleber trading post after he lost everything in a disastrous business enterprise. It is believed that the Inglebers trusted the trader, and at first he made a lot of money out of their goods. Basically, they bartered with him because he acted as middlemen for a lot of their goods, such as carvings, wooden toys and trinkets. No one else was willing to do so around here. We think the shopkeeper was being blackmailed by outsiders. He started to get a bit cocky because he thought he'd outwitted his blackmailers. He took a leaf out of his enemy's books and tried to pull some clever stunts on the elves and the water fairies. The result is that he disappeared, and so did his shop, just leaving a little golden bird in a golden cage. "Where is the golden bird in the golden cage?" asked Monica. "I only ask because I love birds, and it seems such a beautiful and creative idea to make an object like that. It must have been truly a labour and love." An old lady was one of the first on the scene when the man had disappeared. She took the golden bird in its cage and came down to our inn with it. An old lady was one of the first on the scene when the man had disappeared. She took the golden bird in its cage and came down to our inn with it. I could see that she was very poor and hungry. She asked my boss for food and shelter and said that she couldn't pay us cash, but would repay us 1,000 times over with kindness. My boss told me to turf her out, but I didn't. I told her to wait and hide in our stables. 6 hours later, I managed to get to the stables with some hot food and alcoholic drinks. I would have been sacked on the spot if my bosses had caught me with the food and drink, so I was taking a great risk in bringing the old lady some sustenance and liquor. The old lady was ravenously hungry and needed 2 bottles of strong ale to calm down. I fetched her rolling tobacco and some cakes as well. She finished the food and drink and then treated me to the object she had been sent to rescue from the old trading post for Ingleber goods. She had been told to find a worthy recipient for the golden bird, and I was given strict instructions about how to look after it and how I may benefit from keeping up my charitable work in future. I keep the golden bird in cage locked away safely. "If someone should take it from me, then I will be in grave danger," said Saul. "If anyone touches the golden object other than me, it can summon all sorts of evil, but while it lies safe and sound, it keeps me free from harm. So many times I should have been dead out there. We've had terrible floods from overflowing glacial meltwater, which has almost swept this in off the mountain during a spring thaw 2 years ago. When you were trapped upon your farm, we sandbagged the inn, and I'm sure that only that golden bird in its cage saved us from death and destruction. Lightning once set fire to my stables, and once a wood gas stove blew up not 6 feet from me, but I survived these both with just scars on my arms and some on my face and legs to boot. We even had robbers here once, and they threatened to shoot all of us, and one of them pulled a trigger on his gun as he pointed at my legs. But it misfired, and we overpowered them. We found out that it was a total fluke that his gun was blocked, so I began to believe the golden bird theory. That trader in the woods got greedy and cocky. He lost more money by gambling away a lot of the stock. He was supposed to trade it on in good faith. He would have been fined for the rest of his life because the golden bird is there to protect you. He broke the trust that the Inglebers and the water fairies had in him, we were told. He broke the trust that the Inglebers and the water fairies had in him, we were told. He tried to take the Inglebers for a ride. He lost faith in faith itself, so he paid a terrible price for abandoning those who had his interests at heart. "You mean that he was helping to keep the Ingleber enterprise going?" said Monica. "You mean that he was helping to keep the Ingleber enterprise going?" said Monica. "Who knows, Monica?" "You mean that he was helping to keep the Ingleber enterprise going?" said Monica. "Who knows, Monica? Maybe there's no truth in the story about how he got all the goods in his forest shop. Maybe the same robbers who came here also robbed his shop. I simply do not know the answers to many of our guests' questions. Our inn does quite a lot of trade based around the Ingleber legend, so we can't complain really. All I do know is that the man who was being helped by the elves and the fairies was never seen again. He left the golden bird in its cage, and it was given to me by that very special old lady who was travelling through here. I've kept the golden bird in its cage ever since that day. I've no reason to doubt the old woman, and I will not trade or sell on the golden bird in its cage. Everybody who works in our inn also survived an outbreak of cholera not 20 miles away, which killed some of the staff in our rival inn across the valley, and like I said, I think it's down to the old lady's gift to me. Sometimes I think life throws up surprises. We have to rise to the challenges or fall on our sword. Do you not think? Which brings me to a question. I want to ask your permission for something very important." With that, Saul looked at Monica and winked. He looked so cheeky and yet so vulnerable. He looked so cheeky and yet so vulnerable that she was moved by his intriguing request for permission from her father for something. Bruno, on the other hand, was ready to respond to Saul, but not in a way which Saul could have predicted. He began, "Well, Saul, as long as you believe in the golden bird, then I suppose that's all that matters to you." To which Saul quickly retorted, "I'm not as fatalistic as you. I believe in good luck. I'm not as fatalistic as you. I believe in good luck, and sometimes I like to trust in people more than most would. I can't think of a logical reason why we were spared the cholera when so many others perished. I've seen many other inns fail due to the lack of tourists, and especially due to the recent outbreaks of cholera, even up here in the Alps where the water is supposed to be crystal clear. Up here on Mount Rauber, we've been very lucky. I still have a job and a home here. I might even be lucky enough to fall in love." Now you're pushing it, Saul. By you stating that you need my permission for something, I assume that you mean that you want to take my daughter's hand in marriage. The problem I have with granting permission is that the gods themselves can't understand your love life. If you make up your mind and stick to it, I think we'd all be very grateful, and that's why I, for one, do not want you to be anywhere near my daughter. She thinks the world of you, but I don't trust you yet. It worries me how you are with women. I've seen my daughter crying buckets over you. If you told me you had designs on her, then I'd give you 2 years to prove me wrong. If I found out that you'd messed her around, then I'd never trust you again. So, choose your words carefully, Saul. If you ask me for permission to court Monica, I'm only interested if you're serious and mean it as a lifelong commitment. If you want my blessing for a marriage with Monica, then I won't give it to you until 2 years have passed and you've not once crossed me in that time. If you can agree to my terms, then you may as well call it go out with my daughter. Besides, my understanding of your current situation is that you are supposed to be a married man, and I'm not into bigamy." Herr Veltheim, I'm struggling for words here. I didn't expect to see you or Monica until at least another month, so I've just grabbed my opportunity to make it clear that I love your daughter. My marriage to another girl was hasty and rash. The girl just liked me, really. She didn't have the fortitude to live and work with me here on Mount Rauber. In fact, I've already told Monica what happened to my disastrous marriage to the girl. My new wife ran off with a wealthy Swedish merchant. She's gone to live in Sweden with him and abandoned me to live on my own. I'm a free agent now. I'm available for a love match. I agree to your terms regarding Monica, so now may I kiss your beautiful daughter? "Don't I get a say in this?" asked Monica. "There's you two talking about me as if I'm some prize breeding cow or goat, and you're arguing over the price of me and the fruits of my lawns. Sounds like the cattle market hammer has already fallen on a done deal. Sounds like the cattle market hammer has already fallen on a done deal," she said, blushing with anger. "Monica, I only want what's best for you. In case you didn't notice, I've got a farm to run and I can't afford to waste my time or my life on trivia, so I'd rather do a deal, if that's what you call it. You're part of my farm, and if I talk of you like livestock, then that is the language of farming. I do not know any other life, and I'm still angry about us being shortchanged at the market." "I'm going to make an announcement now," said Saul, bending on himself on one knee. "I'm going to make an announcement now," said Saul, bending himself on one knee. "Monica, will you be my sweetheart? I'll write to you next week explaining my feelings. I just want to know that when I see you again, you will agree to me being able to come up to the farm on a regular basis to see you." I like the idea of you doing the travelling, Saul. I'll agree to your polite request on one condition. When you visit me at the farm, you must do farm work, and my father will be your boss. If you do what father tells you, within reason, then I can see that you are behaving as part of my family. Then I know that you want to be a part of me, because I'm not a separate entity. I'm part of a working farm, and if that can't be part of your offer, then I'm afraid no matter how much you say you love me, it will end in tears, because my life is linked only to the family farm. Saul looked stunned for a few seconds. He gazed deeply into Monica's eyes. Saul looked stunned for a few seconds. He gazed deeply into Monica's eyes and then took both her hands. "For you, my little Alpine maiden, I would..." Saul looked stunned for a few seconds. He gazed deeply into Monica's eyes and then took both her hands. "For you, my little Alpine maiden, I would give up everything. So I accept your conditions, and we will seal the deal with a kiss." "Spare me the embarrassment of watching you, lovebird," said Bruno. I am retiring to the washrooms if you don't mind. Don't forget to pass on my cash, minus your tip, to your employer, Saul, or you will suffer the same fate that would have happened if they'd caught you squirreling food out to the old lady. Don't forget to pass on my cash, minus your tip, to your employer, Saul, or you will suffer the same fate that would have happened if they'd caught you squirreling food out to the old lady. Once you've romanced my daughter, I trust you will also give her the key to the ladies' washroom. Do not push your luck though, Saul. I've only just started your 2-year probation period. My part of the deal is only valid if you complete the 2-year course to my satisfaction. Other than that, I'm very happy for you both. I'm so excited that I might even buy my wife some flowers and fresh pastries to cheer her up after the difficult birth of my new daughter Agnetha. Saul, I need you to get me some fresh flowers and some fresh pastries. I'll give you some fresh money as well. Make sure, as I said earlier, that your employer receives the monies due to them, said Bruno. Suitably refreshed and supplied with fresh flowers and pastries for Wilhelmina, Bruno and his daughter left the inn as soon as they could. The snowfall relented for a few hours. Weak sunshine filtered through the dying snow clouds. A bitter wind cut through any exposed gaps in the trees. Monica and Bruno found themselves putting on an extra layer in the shape of a thicker blanket over them in the sled. They heeded Saul's advice, so passing by the abandoned trading post position. Shelter for the next stop was provided by a steep-sided bank leading to a disused quarry. The quarry had originally been used to extract limestone, which was used to make lime in large kilns further down the mountain. However, the unstable nature of the rock faces and flooding of the quarry by meltwater in many places had caused temporary abandonment of extraction. However, demand was so high for lime in glass making and limestone for building and raw materials in the metal industries that soon the quarrying would be back. Bruno pulled up the ponies in a flat area which had shelter from the vicious swirling snow-laden winds. In the springtime, this was the place where you could watch the mountain hares as they went about their courtship. Wild flowers carpeted the abandoned quarry. The flooded area attracted waterfowl, even at this high altitude. High above, hawks would circle on thermals, banking their wings only just enough to keep themselves within the uplifting air currents. Sometimes, a hapless wood pigeon would enter the quarry from one side. Once in, the pigeon would try to fly out of the quarry by climbing higher and higher. The walls of the quarry were very steep over the flooded area. The effort to climb out of the quarry would tire the bird out, and that was when a hawk would strike. Nesting raptors controlled this domain throughout the warmer months. Here in the depths of the winter, the magical quarry, clothed in the colours of spring, had been turned back into a blank canvas of ice and snow. The water was frozen solid to a considerable depth. Bruno and Monica spent a good half hour with their frozen fingers wrapped tightly around mugs of hot acorn coffee, as the little spirit stove they kept was also used for warming their frozen hands and legs. Monica had tried new recipes for the caffeine-free beverage they took. She added malted barley, beech nut and some chicory to the acorn coffee substitute. Bruno had got used to a caffeine-free diet. Monica and Sophia enjoyed collecting some extra ingredients as well as raiding the spices to pep up the hot drinks made on the farm. Sophia had read that even potato peelings and molasses and figs or dandelions were suitable ingredients for a hot beverage. Beetroot, carrot and wheat bran were also listed. The ponies were very tired now, but Bruno knew it would only be a few more hours and they'd be back at the chalet. He gave the ponies some hay and patted them. Monica had some mince for them and some molasses for a treat to give them more energy for the last climb. Back on the road they felt the severe chill in the wintry air once more. For half an hour there were gaps in the angry skies. Hiding behind swirling grey and white clouds, the yellow disk of the sun could barely be seen. Clouds never quite left the sun alone, so that all that could be seen was an opaque yellow disk with ribbons of woolly grey and white clouds scutting across its quenched disk. It looked like some white hot molten ball which had been plunged into a cooling liquid bath. Barely grazing the horizon on this wintry day, the sun finally gave up the ghost and dipped below the horizon. Within minutes the whole mountainside and valleys were plunged into darkness. Looking up in the gathering gloom, the Veltines finally saw the outline of their farm. Cosy orange glowing candles flickered in lead glass windows. Oil lanterns moved around with their keeper like some phantom firefly. They faced a last 5-minute climb before reaching the family farm gates. Finally, Bruno pulled on the reins to stop the ponies outside the family barn. He began to unhitch the exhausted ponies and let the dog go to its kennel with a fresh bone and dog biscuits. "How's my new little treasure getting on?" Bruno inquired of his other daughter Sophia, who was busy preparing a supper for everyone in the kitchen. Sophia was cooking a large joint of ham on the bone, which was bubbling away in the centre of a cast-iron cooking pot on the family stove. She was making pea and ham soup on the bone. In large cast-iron pots there was the pea dish, which just required stirring, plus the addition of some dried herbs. She had already floured up some dried fruit scones ready for the oven. The midwife decided to stay for a couple of nights for very little extra cost, with no further call-outs required for her services. Every morning the Veltheim labourer, entrusted with the task of keeping in horn and yodel communication with the nearest neighbours some 2 kilometres away, would briefly listen to see if a coded message for the midwife was sent. Yodeling was traditional and also practical in terms of mountain communication. It also could be doubled up as a means of emergency contact in the absence of any telegraph wires on the farm. They did have long Alpine horns which could be sounded continuously for over 2 minutes to ask for emergency assistance. Wilhelmina was very grateful that the midwife was staying to help with baby Agnetha. She was still recovering from the blood loss and needed sustenance from extra food and rest to regain her strength. The bitter cold wasn't aiding recovery very well, so Letitia the midwife was also pepping up Wilhelmina's spirits. The hope was that Wilhelmina would soon be fighting fit in this bitterly cold season. Sophia was responsible for feeding all the stock. Sophia was responsible for feeding all the stock animals now that they were safely tucked up. Sophia was responsible for feeding all the stock animals now that they were safely tucked up in their barns. Income at this time of year was in very short supply. The best idea was to keep fattening up their livestock until the spring thaw arrived. The Veltheims knew they also had to try and work on improving their food sales at market. Cows and goats still had to be milked. Salting and curing of meat was a job in itself. Large saloon projects were completed at this time of year. To make a decent income from the fabric side of things, it was necessary to put long hours in at the workshop. The workshops under the chalet were warm and dry, so for nighttime work the Veltheims retired to the cellar workshops to complete winter crafting projects. Painting of pilgrims' religious items was a task for someone to complete once the clay moulds had been fired in the small kiln for the project. Sometimes it was necessary to buy fasteners for some items, since the pilgrims were very fussy about the goods they bought and preferred something that seemed unique, but they always had a cheap price point. Any leather goods for sale on the market stall were a welcome addition to increase sales. Bruno wielded the leather punch to enable the cut leather pieces to be bound together by punching out holes, which could then be threaded through with leather ties. Making belts, purses, wallets and even small handbags and satchels for sale was a useful activity for any spare hours in the cellars or outside workshops. Once newborn Agnetha was weaned off breast milk, it would be a case of new baby joining the rest of the family in the workshops. A cot and a playpen were available for this. Her elder sisters had already availed themselves of these in their earlier days. Once the little one was up on her feet, she would be put to play with toys in a little wooden pen with a padded soft floor. The idea was to get her mobile and active as soon as possible, so that by the age of 4 she could be using items like soft moulds to cut out pastry shapes or even helping to stir cake mixers. Before they got in the oven, she learned to speak the language of the Alpine people. Their language was Germanic in origin, but had dialects and variations. The best way to learn was to be among speakers of the language. Written ability among the farming community was often poor, so it was only the basics that many families taught. Agnetha was very lucky, however, since her 2 elder sisters had been tutored through maternal connections. The new addition to the Veltheim family would find her work cut out, as she would be expected to be at least as adept in farming skills and craft work as her 2 elder sisters. Monika took the lead role in the workshops the very next morning. She wanted to make up for the lost revenue from the village market. The family had plenty of wool and basic fabrics to work on. The question was how to best make this into articles which people would pay good money for. Monika decided on making a batch of felt hats with a choice of adornments and loom-created cozies for hands, plus decorative table mats from the more durable twine.